So I've been listening to Grey by Moses Sumney, and I really, really like it. Grey is a new double album by Asheville, North Carolina resident Moses Sumney, and it's been 3 years since he last dropped a project with Aromanticism in 2017. By this year, Moses has blessed us with a double album, which has had a bit of an odd release schedule, because the first part of this album was actually released way back in February, and the second part was only actually released 2 days ago from when I'm recording this. And speaking of time of recording, as we all know, in the last 3 months, developments have happened, which actually makes the spoken word opener to this album, Isola, relatively hard-hitting at this point in time. And that being said, normally when there's a lot of spoken word in an album, I sort of had this reaction of I kind of want to listen to music. I don't know if I really want to focus so much on this, but there's so few of these spoken word tracks that it barely matters. A lot of these spoken word passages actually seem to have something to do with identity. We have Jill and Jack, which sort of approaches the topic of masculinity, and then Boxes is another one about identity. The one I find very odd indeed is the track Also, and, in which the person speaking speaks about their multiplicity. Now, I don't entirely know what multiplicity means, which is actually relevant to this track, because the author or the speaker does not want to explain their multiplicity because they're tired of doing so. And I imagine this frustration comes from the fact that even though in this day and age we've become a lot more accepting, a lot more tolerant, and a lot more, I guess, celebrating of different identities, sometimes when identities can really be a little bit unfamiliar, they're not quite as accepted open-armed as some other identities are. That said, this is my interpretation of that track. I could be completely wrong. This track could be about being tolerant and accepting of bipolarism or schizophrenia. I don't actually know. I think only a speaker would be able to answer that question. But to the songs themselves, the sound to this album, the overall sound to this album, is a little bit difficult to pin down. If I would have to say something, it would have to be somewhere between art pop and R&B. In fact, the real opener to this album, Cut Me, is a relatively soulful song, so if anything, I could call this album soul pop. In fact, I really like Cut Me because it has this horn section that sounds like it was taken straight out of a Bjork song. This trombone line with the vocal melody is sort of what's driving the song forward until it comes to that very beautiful bridge in which Moses speaks about being an immigrant son. And that said, if Cut Me was driven by the melody, a track like Conveyor or even Neither Nor are driven by the rhythms. In fact, Conveyor starts with this vroom, 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 really, really driving rhythmic beats. Conveyor also plays with what I like to call mouth sounds, in which there's a lot of which sounds really nice. I'm also finding it difficult to pin down what influenced this album. The only track I can really compare to anything else is the track Gagarin, which is this somber, haunting melody with these very slow bass notes accompanying it, and it sounds like something that would have been on David Bowie's Black Star. But my favourite track in this album is the track Virile, because it's just so energetic. There's so much happening in this track. There's almost too many instruments, but as Moses himself says, too much is not enough. In fact, the entire first half of this album is quite excellent, and it ends with this beautiful little acoustic guitar-driven ballad, Polly. But unfortunately, as the first part of this album ends, the second part starts, and I'm just not as fond of it. I feel like the songs, especially the first 4 songs, are quite a bit slower, and I understand that they're poetry and lyrically led, especially a track like Me in 20 Years or Two Dogs. I kind of like the track Bystanders because of the way it sort of develops a little bit. It starts out very slow, very minimalistic, and then as more instruments come in, like strings and a bit more keys and stuff like that, it's more the fuller, richer sound. Yeah, the second half of this album really epitomizes what I don't quite like as much about this album, in which a lot of the instruments sort of blend in together. There's a lot of reverb. You can't quite tell what Moses is singing, and it's especially hurtful because, you know, if these songs are poetry led, I want to be able to hear what he's singing. And it's not necessarily just a production choices either. I think Moses, although he has a gorgeous, beautiful falsetto voice, I think he's over-reliant on his falsetto to get his points across. When if you go back to a track like Polly, not using his falsetto actually is perfectly acceptable as well, because he's got a gorgeous voice either way. This over-reliance on falsetto is most manifest in a track Keeps Me Alive, which has, such a beautiful message behind it, yet you get such great ear fatigue because Moses sings the entire thing in his falsetto voice. But the second half of the album does pick up again with the track Lucky Me, which has these beautiful little plucky synths going on, which I really, really enjoy. And the lyrics here, I think, are beautiful as well. They're quite heartfelt. They're sort of about being, despite the fact that a relationship, a love is over, still being thankful for the fact that it happened in the first place. And I think it's quite a healthy attitude to take in these sort of scenarios. And as we draw to a close to this album, we are blessed with the track Bless Me, which is a guitar-driven R&B track. In fact, it actually sounds like something that would have been on Moses Sumney's Aromanticism album. But overall, I have to say, I genuinely really like this sort of album, this sort of soulful art pop, despite the fact that it does drag a little bit in the second half. But yeah, my favourite cuts on this album are Cut Me, Virile, Polly, Lucky Me, and Bless Me. Either way, my name is Matt Dorrell, and I really like this album. But what do you think? Talking about music is loads and loads of fun, and I really like doing it, so if you subscribe I might talk about music some more. Anyway, this was my first review. I'm very new to this. Moses Sumney, Grey. Cool album. I really liked it.